What are the precursors of the vascular tissue, ground tissue, and epidermis?
Soon after the plant embryo forms, the primary meristems develop. The protoderm, the precursor of the epidermis, forms in the outermost cells of the embryo. Vertical divisions within the embryo result in the distinction between the procambium, the precursor of the vascular tissue, and the ground meristem, the precursor of the ground tissue.
What is the Darwin-Wallace theory?
The Darwin-Wallace theory can be summarized as the following. Species as a whole demonstrate descent with modification from common ancestors. And natural selection is the sum of the environmental forces that drive those modifications. The modifications or adaptations make the individuals in the population better suited to survival in their environment, more fit as it were. The four postulates presented by Darwin in On the Origin of Species by Natural Selection are as follows. 1. Individuals within species are variable. 2. Some of these variations are passed on to offspring. 3. In every generation more offspring are produced than can survive. 4. The survival and reproduction of individuals are not random, the individuals who survive and go on to reproduce the most are those with the most favorable variation. They are naturally selected. It follows logically from these that the characteristics of the population will change with each subsequent generation, until the population becomes distinctly different from the original. This process is known as evolution.
What were the smallest and largest dinosaurs?
Compsognathus, a carnivore from the late Jurassic period, 131 million years ago, was about the size of a chicken and measured, at most, 35 in, 89 centimeters, from the tip of its snout to the tip of its tail. The average weight was about 6.8 pounds 3 kilograms, but individuals could be as much as 15 pounds 6.8 kilograms. The largest species for which a whole skeleton is known is Brachiosaurus. A specimen in Humboldt Museum in Berlin measures 72.75 feet 22.2 meters long and 46 feet 14 meters high. It weighed an estimated 34.7 tons, 31,480 kilograms. Brachiosaurus was a four-footed plant-eating dinosaur with a long neck and tail and lived from about 155 to 131 million years ago.
What is the average size of a gene?
The average size of a vertebrate gene is about 30,000 base pairs. Bacteria, because their sequences contain only coding material, have smaller genes of about 1,000 base pairs each. Human genes are in the 20,000 to 50,000 base pair range. Although sizes greater than 100,000 base pairs have been suggested as well.
Do both sides of DNA contain genes?
One strand of DNA contains the information that codes for genes. And it is called the antisense strand or non-coding strand. It is the strand that is transcribed into mRNA and is designated as the template strand. The other, complementary strand is called the coding strand. Because it contains codons, or sense strand. Its sequence is identical to the mRNA strand, except for the substitution of U, uracil, for T, thymine.
How does an animal's energy budget affect its behavior?
Every animal has a finite amount of energy available for use in a unit of time. This energy usage is its metabolic rate, measured in calories or kilocalories, plus the energy required for life activities. The energy budget places limitations on an animal's behavior. For example, a lizard, which is an ectotherm, cold-blooded, uses less energy because it does not maintain a constant body temperature. Ectotherms such as amphibians and reptiles control body temperature by behavior. Endothermic, warm-blooded, animals, e.g., birds, mammals, have a higher energy budget, most of which is used to maintain internal body temperature. Thus, endotherms require more energy than ectotherms of a similar size, and so may spend a greater portion of their day searching for food. Other factors that influence energy requirements are age, sex, size, type of diet, activity level, hormonal balance, and time of day.
What seedless, vascular plant played a role in early photography?
Prior to the invention of flash bulbs, photographers used flash powder that consisted almost entirely of dried spores from club mosses of the genus Lycopodium.
What is biotechnology?
Biotechnology is the use of a living organism to produce a specific product. It includes any technology associated with the manipulation of living systems for industrial purposes. In its broadest sense, biotechnology includes the fields of chemical, pharmaceutical, and environmental technology as well as engineering and agriculture.
In addition, rainforests. When was the symbol of Smokey Bear first used to encourage forest fire prevention?
The origin of Smokey Bear can be traced to World War II, when the U.S. Forest Service, concerned about maintaining a steady lumber supply for the war effort, wished to educate the public about the dangers of forest fires. They sought volunteer advertising support from the War Advertising Council. And on August 9, 1944, Albert Steele, a noted illustrator of animals, created Smokey Bear. Since 1944, Smokey Bear has been a national symbol of forest fire prevention not only in America, but also in Canada and Mexico, where he is known as Simon in both countries. This public service advertising, PSA, campaign is the longest-running PSA campaign in U.S. history. In 1947, a Los Angeles advertising agency coined the slogan "Only you can prevent forest fires." On April 23, 2001, after more than 50 years, the famous ad slogan was revised to "Only you can prevent wildfires." In response to the wildfire outbreaks during 2000, the campaign gained a living mascot in 1950 when a firefighting crew rescued a male bear cub from a forest fire in the Capitol Mountains of New Mexico. Sent to the National Zoo in Washington, D.C., to become Smokey Bear. The animal was a living symbol of forest fire protection until his death in 1976. His remains are buried at the Smokey Bear State Historical Park in Capitan, New Mexico.
How do stomach cells survive the acid in the stomach?
The cells that line your stomach produce a basic, alkaline mucus. The mucus has a higher pH that counteracts the acid produced by the stomach, which has a pH of 2.0. Because of this, cells are protected from the digestive enzymes at work in the stomach. If stomach acid manages to reach the tissue below the protective mucus layer, ulcers can result.
What are the most primitive animals that have been studied for their behavior?
Sponges are the most primitive animals studied for their behavior. Investigations have shown that sponges in their natural environment may move away from physical contact with competitors, areas with limited food, or sites that have excessive exposure to silt abrasion by water flows.
How are enzymes named?
Individual enzymes are named by adding the suffix ase to the name of the substrate with which the enzyme reacts. An example of this method is the enzyme amylase, which controls the breakdown of amylose, starch. There are categories of enzymes that control certain reactions. Hydrolases control hydrolytic reactions, proteinases control protein breakdown. Synthetases control synthesis reactions. There are exceptions, trypsin and pepsin, both digestive enzymes that break down protein. Retain the names used before the modern form of nomenclature was adopted.
What is unique about the water lily Victoria amazonica?
It is very big. Found only on the Amazon River, this water lily has leaves that can reach up to 6 feet 1.8 meters in diameter. The flowers of Victoria amazonica reach up to 12,180 in, 30 centimeters in height and open at dusk, but only open on 2 successive nights.
History.
The identification of the remains of the victims from the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks in New York City has comprised the largest and most difficult DNA identification to date. After 1.6 million tons of debris were removed from the site of the attacks on the World Trade Center, only 239 intact bodies, out of 2,795, were found, along with about 20,000 pieces of human remains. In order to match DNA profiles to the bodies, personal items such as razor blades, combs, and toothbrushes were collected from the victims' homes. When possible, cheek swabs were taken from the victims' family members for comparison with remains. The identification process was still ongoing as of mid-2004.
Which organelle divides and compartmentalizes the cell?
The endomembrane system, which fills the cell and divides it into compartments, and is visible only through electron microscopy. The endoplasmic reticulum, ER, a series of interconnected membranous tubes and channels in the cytoplasm, is the largest and most extensive system of the internal membranes.
What are mycoplasmas?
Mycoplasmas are the smallest, free-living organisms, and the only bacteria that exist without a cell wall. Some mycoplasmas have sterols, a type of lipid-lacking fatty acids, in their plasma membranes, which provide the strength a membrane needs to maintain cellular integrity without a wall. Since mycoplasmas lack cell walls that provide shape and rigidity, they have no definitive forms and are pleomorphic. Mycoplasma pneumoniae causes a disease known as primary atypical pneumonia. PAP, a mild form of pneumonia confined to the lower respiratory tract. Because mycoplasmas do not have cell walls, penicillin is ineffective in stopping their growth. Tetracycline, which inhibits protein synthesis, is recommended as the antibiotic of choice for treatment of PAP.
Why do the leaves of the mimosa plant close in response to touch?
when a leaf of the mimosa plant, also known as the sensitive plant, is touched. A minute electric current is generated that is quickly transmitted to the cells at the base of each leaflet. As soon as the signal arrives to the cells, the water contained in the cells is released. Due to loss of water, the leaves collapse downward.
When were the major classes of plant hormones identified and who is associated with their identification?
Auxon's Charles Darwin, 1809 to 1882, and his son, Francis, 1848 to 1925. Performed some of the first experiments on growth-regulating substances. They published their results in 1881 in The Power of Movement in Plants. In 1926 Fritz W. Wendt. 1903 to 1990, isolated the chemical substance responsible for elongating cells in the tips of oat, genus Avena, seedlings. He named this substance auxin, from the Greek term auxein, meaning to increase. Gibberellins. In 1926 the Japanese scientist Ieki Kurosawa discovered a substance produced by a fungus, Gibberella fujikuroa, that caused a disease, foolish seedling disease, in rice. Oryza sativa, seedlings in which the seedlings would grow rapidly but appear sickly and then fall over. The Japanese chemists Teijiro Yabuta and Yasutsumaiki isolated the compound and named it gibberellin. In 1938, cytokinins. Johannes van Overbeek discovered a potent growth factor in coconut. Cocos nucifero, milk. In 1941. In the 1950s Folke Skog, 1908 to 2001, was able to produce 1,000-fold purification of the growth factor but was unable to isolate it. Carlos O. Miller, 1923, Skog, and their colleagues succeeded in isolating and identifying the chemical nature of the growth factor. They named the substance kinetin and the group of growth regulators to which it belonged cytokinins because of their involvement in cytokinesis or cell division. Ethylene. Even before the discovery of auxin in 1926, ethylene was known to have effects on plants. In ancient times the Egyptians would use ethylene gas to ripen fruit. During the 1800s shade trees along streets with lamps that burned ethylene. The illuminating gas would become defoliated from leaking gas. In 1901 Dmitry Neljibov demonstrated that ethylene was the active component of illuminating gas. Abscisic acid. Philip F. Waring discovered large amounts of a growth inhibitor in the dormant buds of ash and potatoes that he called dormin. Several years later in the 1960s, Frederick T. Adicott, 1912, reported the discovery in leaves and fruits of a substance capable of accelerating abscissation that he called abscissin. It was soon discovered that dormin and abscissin were identical chemically.
What is the evolutionary relationship between simple prokaryotic cells and the complex cells of eukaryotes?
Mitochondria and chloroplasts have prokaryote-like features. For example, although most of the DNA in eukaryotic cells resides in the nucleus, both mitochondria and chloroplasts have DNA molecules in their inner compartments. Mitochondrial and chloroplastic ribosomes are similar to the ribosomes of prokaryotes. The endosymbiont theory proposes that eukaryotic organisms evolved from prokaryotic ancestors. This idea supports the notion that organelles evolved from prokaryotic organisms that originally lived inside larger cells, eventually losing the ability to function as autonomous organisms.
When was the term antibiotic first used?
The term antibiotic means against life. In 1889, Paul Wheelman used the term to describe the substance piocyanin, which he had isolated several years earlier. Piocyanin inhibited the growth of bacteria in test tubes but was too lethal to be used in disease therapy. Antibiotics are chemical products or derivatives of certain organisms that inhibit the growth of other organisms.
What products are produced by fermentation?
Fermentation is important in the production of wine, beer, soy sauce, baked products, and pickles.
Why do cats swish their tails?
A cat's tail is a means of communication and can represent a range of moods. Every cat owner is familiar with the slow sweep of a cat's tail from side to side. A happy cat will greet you with a tail raised high, while a slight movement indicates pleasure and or anticipation. As the cat becomes more hunter-like, the flick of the tip becomes first a twitch and then a thrashing. At this point the cat is highly engaged and likely to pounce.
Is hemlock poisonous?
There are two species known commonly as hemlock, Conium maculatum and Tsuga canadensis. Conium maculatum is a weedy plant, and all parts of it are poisonous. In ancient times minimal doses of the plant were used to relieve pain. Although there was a great risk of poisoning from this form of treatment. Conium maculatum was also used to carry out death sentences in ancient times. The Greek philosopher Socrates was condemned to death and sentenced to drink a potion made from hemlock. The poisonous species should not be confused with Tsuga canadensis, a member of the evergreen family. The leaves of T. canadensis are not poisonous and are often used to make tea.
How is DNA organized in the nucleus?
Within the nucleus, DNA is organized with proteins into a fibrous material called chromatin. As a cell prepares to divide or reproduce, the thin chromatin fibers condense, becoming thick enough to be seen as separate structures, which are called chromosomes.
What do spores look like?
Spores vary greatly in size, shape, color, and surface texture. They are generally small. On average, they are usually less than 20. And rarely exceed more than 100 micrometers, approximately 1/10 the thickness of a dime.
What is the pH scale?
The pH scale is the measurement of the H and concentration, hydrogen ions, in an aqueous solution. It is used to measure the acidity or alkalinity of a solution. The pH scale ranges from 0 to 14. A neutral solution has a pH of 7, a solution with a pH greater than 7 is basic or alkaline, and a solution with a pH less than 7 is acidic. The lower the pH, the more acidic the solution. As the pH scale is logarithmic, each whole number drop on the scale represents a tenfold increase in acidity, meaning the concentration of H and increases tenfold.
Can cells ever change jobs?
The more specialized of a function a cell performs, the less likely it is for the cell to change jobs within an organism. However, there are some cells that have unspecialized functions and are able to adapt to the changing needs of the body. In mammals, a good example of cells with adapting functions would be bone marrow cells, which are responsible for producing different types of cells in the blood. Bone marrow cells produce red blood cells and 5 types of white blood cells. Slime molds of the kingdom Protista have cells that are capable of drastically changing their function. The cellular adaptations that can occur in slime molds allow them to change from single-celled amoebas to multicellular, reproductive spore producers.
What methods are used to estimate wildlife populations?
Since it is usually impossible, and often impractical, to count all individuals in a population, researchers use a variety of sampling techniques to estimate population densities. One method is to count the individuals in a certain area. The larger the number and size of sample plots, the more accurate the estimates. Population densities may also be estimated based on indirect indicators such as animal droppings or tracks, nests, or burrows.
Is influenza a serious viral disease?
The influenza virus is probably the most lethal virus in human history. It is an acute respiratory disease characterized by fever, chills, headache, generalized muscular aches, and a frequent cough. Influenza affects people of all ages, but can be particularly severe for the very young, the very old, and people with complications due to other diseases. It is estimated that within 18 months during 1918 to 1919, there were 200 million cases of influenza, causing 21 million deaths worldwide.
When were chloroplasts first described?
Because chloroplasts are a large cell structure, bigger than any other organelle except the nucleus. They were described and studied early in the history of cytology. Anton van Leeuwenhoek, 1632–1723, and Nehemiah Grew, 1641–1712, described these organelles in the 17th century. In the early stages of the microscopic study of cells,
How do we know that DNA is antiparallel?
the central structure of a DNA molecule is the deoxyribose molecule, which has 5 carbons, each of which is numbered. At one end, phosphate can only be attached at the number 5 carbon, 5. At the other end, there is no phosphate attached, and this is called the number 3 carbon. 3, and, here, a hydroxyl group is attached to the sugar instead of a phosphate.
Which organelle is absent in fungi?
Centrioles, which divide and organize the spindle filters during mitosis and meiosis, are lacking in all fungi. The nuclear envelope does not break down and reform. Instead, a spindle apparatus is formed within the envelope. Fungi regulate the formation of microtubules during mitosis with small, amorphous structures called spindle plaques.
What are isomers?
Isomers are compounds with the same molecular formula but differing atomic structure within their molecules. The atoms of structural isomers are connected in different ways. Geometric isomers differ in their symmetry about a double bond. Optical isomers are mirror images of each other.
What is the function of centrioles in animal cells?
Centrioles both assemble and organize long, hollow cylinders of protein known as microtubules. They are also known as microtubule organizing centers, MTOCs.
What is a stop codon?
A stop codon signals the end of coding. Instead of a tRNA, with its amino acid in tow, a release factor matches the stop codon during translation, causing the polypeptide to be released from the ribosome. It is interesting to note that the genetic code contains only one start codon but three stop codons. This means that a random DNA mutation is much more likely. To prevent successful protein synthesis, then encourage it.
What kinds of behavior do protozoans exhibit?
Protozoans react to changes in their immediate environment. But there is no evidence for any type of learning. For example, paramecia will avoid a strong chemical or physical stimulus by turning to locate an escape route. An example of a negative stimulus is cool water, which paramecia will swim away from since they prefer warmer temperatures.
How did humans evolve?
Evolution of the Homo lineage of modern humans, Homo sapiens, has been proposed to originate from a hunter of nearly 5 feet 1.5 meters tall, Homo habilis, who is widely presumed to have evolved from an Australopithecine ancestor. Near the beginning of the Pleistocene, 2 million years ago. Homo habilis is thought to have transformed into Homo erectus, Java man, who used fire and possessed culture. Middle Pleistocene populations of Homo erectus are said to show steady evolution toward the anatomy of Homo sapiens. Neanderthals, Cro-Magnons, and modern humans, 120,000 to 40,000 years ago. Pre-modern Homo sapiens built huts and made clothing.
What are the steps of the Gram stain?
Crystal violet, a primary stain, one that imparts its color to all cells, is applied to a heat-fixed smear. After a short time the crystal violet is washed off, and the smear is covered with iodine, a mordant. When the iodine is washed off, the bacteria appear dark violet or purple. The slide is then washed in an alcohol or alcohol acetone solution. This decolorizing agent removes the purple from the cell of some species but not from others. The alcohol is rinsed off, and the slide is then stained with safranine, a basic red dye. The smear is then washed again, blotted dry, and examined under a microscope. Gram-positive bacteria retain the purple dye, while those that lose the purple color are classified as gram-negative.
What purpose do the gills of mushrooms serve?
Gills, which can be present on the undersurface of a mushroom's cap, serve two main purposes. The first is to maximize the surface area on which spores are produced, allowing a very large number of spores to be produced. The second purpose is to help hold up the cap of the mushroom. Spores are produced in the basidia specialized cells that line the surface of the gills. It has been estimated that a mushroom with a cap that is 3 in 7.5 centimeters in diameter can produce as many as 40 million spores per hour.
What are the three types of fibers found in the cytoskeleton of eukaryotic cells?
The cytoskeleton is a network of fibers that maintains the shape of cells. The three types of fibers are actin filaments, microtubules, and intermediate filaments. Actin filaments are long fibers composed of two protein chains. They are responsible for cellular movements, such as contraction, crawling, pinching during division, and formation of cellular extensions. Microtubules are hollow tubes composed of a ring of 13 protein filaments. They are responsible for moving materials within the cell. Intermediate filaments are tough, fibrous protein molecules structured in an overlapping arrangement. They are intermediate in size when compared to actin filaments and microtubules, and provide structural stability to cells.
What are the parts of a leaf?
Leaves, outgrowths of the shoot apex, are found in a variety of shapes, sizes, and arrangements. Most leaves have a blade, a petiole, stipules, and veins. The blade is the flattened portion of the leaf. The petiole is the slender stalk of the leaf.
What is macroevolution?
Macroevolution is large-scale change that can generate entire new groups of related species, also known as a clade. One example would be the movement of plants onto land. All terrestrial plants are descended from that event, which occurred during the Devonian period 400 million years ago.
How do animals know who is the boss in the herd?
Determining dominance can be overt or quite cryptic. It may involve a physical challenge and some kind of stylized fighting. Or it may rely on body language, like a change in the way a dog wags its tail. Sometimes animals determine dominance by cues too subtle for human observers to recognize.
What books did Darwin publish?
Journal of Researches into the Geology and Natural History of the various countries visited by HMS Beagle under the command of Capt. Fitzroy, R.N., from 1832 to 1836, 1839, Geological Observations on Coral Reefs, Volcanic Islands, and on South America, being the Geology of the Voyage of the Beagle, under the command of Capt. Fitzroy, during the years 1832 to 36, 1846, a monograph on the subclass Cirripedia. 1851 to 1854, a monograph on the fossil Lepodidae, or pedunculated cirripedes of Great Britain. 1851, a monograph on the fossil Balanidae and Velocidae of Great Britain. 1854, on the origin of species by means of natural selection, or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. 1859, on the various contrivances by which British and foreign orchids are fertilized by insects, and on the good effects of intercrossing. 1861, the movements and habits of climbing plants. 1865, the variation of animals and plants under domestication. 1868, the descent of man, and selection in relation to sex. 1871, the expression of the emotions in man and animals. 1872, insectivorous plants. 1876, the effects of cross and self fertilization in the vegetable kingdom. 1876, the different forms of flowers on plants of the same species. 1877, the power of movement in plants. 1880, the formation of vegetable mold, through the action of worms. With observations on their habits. 1881, the movements and habits of climbing plants. 1882.
What are some diseases that affect the nervous system?
Epilepsy, multiple sclerosis, and Parkinson's disease are all diseases of the nervous system. Epilepsy is a nervous system disorder in which clusters of neurons in the brain sometimes signal abnormally. In epilepsy, the normal pattern of neuronal activity becomes disturbed, causing strange sensations, emotions, and behavior, or sometimes convulsions, muscle spasms, and loss of consciousness. Epilepsy is a disorder with many possible causes. Anything that disturbs the normal pattern of neuron activity, from illness to brain damage to abnormal brain development, can lead to seizures. Epilepsy may develop because of an abnormality in brain wiring, an imbalance of nerve signaling chemicals called neurotransmitters, or some combination of these factors. Parkinson's disease is a progressive neurological disorder that results from degeneration of neurons in a region of the brain that controls movement. This degeneration creates a shortage of the brain signaling chemical, neurotransmitter. known as dopamine, causing the movement impairments that characterize the disease.
What was the flower clock of Linnaeus?
Carolus Linnaeus, 1707 to 1778, who was responsible for the binomial nomenclature. Classification system of living organisms, invented a floral clock to tell the time of day. He had observed over a number of years that certain plants constantly opened and closed their flowers at particular times of the day, these times varying from species to species. One could deduce the approximate time of day according to which species had opened or closed its flowers. Linnaeus planted a garden displaying local flowers, arranged in sequence of flowering throughout the day, that would flower even on cloudy or cold days. He called it a horologium flori or flower clock.
What are examples of sex-linked traits?
Sex-linked traits are most commonly found on the X chromosome and include color blindness. Both red and green types, hemophilia, types A and B, ichthyosis. A skin disorder causing large dark scales, and Duchenne muscular dystrophy. There are very few Y-linked traits. Hairy ears, a relatively rare trait, is a Y-linked trait.
How many eggs does a spider lay?
The number of eggs varies according to the species. Some larger spiders lay more than 2,000 eggs. But many tiny spiders lay 1 or 2 and perhaps no more than a dozen during their lifetime. Spiders of average size probably lay 100 or so. Most spiders lay all their eggs at one time and enclose them in a single egg sac. Others lay eggs over a period of time and enclose them in a number of egg sacs.
Can horses really do math?
At the end of the 19th century, a performing horse in Germany known as Clever, or Kluge. Hans was able to tap out the answers to mathematical problems written on a chalkboard. Hans would use his right forefoot to indicate the single digits, 0 to 9, and his left forefoot for the tens place, 10, 20, 30, etc. His amazing performances continued for a number of years until the psychologist Oscar Pfungst, 1874 to 1932, was able to show that Hans was simply counting until his questioner indicated subconsciously that Hans had reached the correct sum. Even though the horse was not actually performing calculations, his ability to observe and respond to subtle changes in human behavior is still quite noteworthy.
What is sociobiology?
Sociobiology, which is considered by some as a subdiscipline of behavioral ecology, is the study of the social organization of a species. Sociobiology attempts to develop rules that explain the evolution of certain social systems.
What is Chargaff's rule?
Chargaff's rule is based on the data generated by Edwin Chargaff. 1905 to 2002, in his study of the base composition of DNA from various organisms. By comparing the nitrogen base composition of various organisms, he found that in all double-stranded DNA, the amount of adenine equals the amount thymine, and amount of guanine equals the amount cytosine, A equals T, G equals C.
How do cells move?
Not all cells move, those that do move exhibit distinct body features and methods for inducing movement. Cells with flagella, such as sperm, move by whipping the flagellum back and forth. Several protists, example paramecia, have cilia which are much smaller than flagella that produce movement by shifting through liquid in a way that is similar to how an oar can be used to propel a boat through water. Pseudopodia, often referred to as fake feet, are cellular extensions caused by a stretching of the cell membrane. Pseudopodia are used by amoebae, protists, for movement and acquiring prey. Macrophages, white blood cells that play an important role in the immune system of human beings, use pseudopodia to attack and devour invading microbes.
How do cells recognize each other?
Cells recognize each other through the molecules that are attached to their extracellular matrix, which fills the space between cells, binding cells, and tissues together.
What are some animals that have pouches?
Marsupials, meaning pouched animals, differ from all other living mammals in their anatomical and physiological features of reproduction. Most female marsupials, kangaroos, bandicoots, wombats, banded anteaters, koalas, possums, wallabies, Tasmanian devils, etc. have an abdominal pouch called a marsupium, in which their young are carried. In some small terrestrial marsupials, however, the marsupium is not a true pouch but merely a fold of skin around the mammary, milk nipples. The short gestation period in marsupials, in comparison to other similarly sized mammals, allows their young to be born in an undeveloped state. Consequently, these animals have been viewed as primitive or second-class mammals. However, some scientists now see that the reproductive process of marsupials has an advantage over that of placental mammals. A female marsupial invests relatively few resources during the brief gestation period. More so during the lactation, nursing period, when the young are in the marsupium. If the female marsupial loses its young, it can conceive again sooner than a placental mammal in a comparable situation.
What is the function of root hairs?
Root hairs increase the surface area of the root system, allowing the roots to absorb water and minerals more efficiently. In a study on one rye plant, it was estimated that the plant had approximately 14 billion root hairs, with an absorbing surface area of 480 sq yards, 401 sqm. If these root hairs were placed end to end, they would extend well over 6,214 miles, 10,000 kilometers.
How do bats hunt?
Bats hunt a variety of prey. Some bats are insectivores, capable of catching their prey on the wing. Vampire bats hunt for large, slow-moving organisms to use for sustenance. Frugivorous or fruit-eating bats are adapted to finding ripe fruit distributed throughout the forest, depending on the food type. Bats may rely on their sight and slash or echolocation to find their prey. In echolocation, bats emit ultrasonic sounds that bounce off the objects around them. These signals are fielded by the specialized folds of flesh on the face and around the ears, allowing the bat to judge the direction and distance of objects.
Who proposed using magnetic resonance imaging for diagnostic purposes?
The concept of using MRI to detect tumors in patients was proposed by Raymond Domitian. 1936, in a 1972 patent application. The fundamental MRI imaging concept used in all present-day MRI instruments was proposed by Paul Lauterbur. 1929, in an article in Nature in 1973. Lauterbur and Peter Mansfield, 1933. Were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 2003 for their discoveries concerning magnetic resonance imaging. The main advantages of MRI are that it not only gives superior images of soft tissues, like organs, but it can also measure dynamic physiological changes in a non-invasive manner, without penetrating the body in any way. A disadvantage of MRI is that it cannot be used for every patient. For example, patients with implants, pacemakers, or cerebral aneurysm clips made of metal cannot be examined using MRI because the machine's magnet could potentially move these objects within the body, causing damage.
How are organelles partitioned during mitosis?
Following the telophase of mitosis, cytokinesis, physical separation of the daughter cells occurs. Although the exact mechanisms are not clear, it appears that larger organelles, such as the endoplasmic reticulum and Golgi complex, undergo fragmentation into small vesicles during mitosis and later reassemble in daughter cells.
What is a climate, and how is it characterized?
Climate refers to the long-term weather conditions of a region, based on long-term averaging of temperature. Climates often undergo cyclic changes over decades, centuries, and millennia, but it is difficult to predict future climate changes. A climate diagram summarizes seasonal variation in temperature, precipitation, length of wet/dry seasons, and portion of the year spent in specific temperature ranges. Weather and climate are important because they are the determining factors of biomes and ecosystems.
What are dimorphic fungi?
Many fungi, particularly those that cause disease in humans, are dimorphic, that is, they have two forms. In response to changes in temperature, nutrients, or other environmental factors, they can change from a yeast form to a mold form.
What are the main features of vascular plants?
Vascular plants have leaves, roots, cuticles, stomata, specialized stems, tissues that conduct efficiently, and, in most cases, seeds. Their sporophytes are large, dominant, and nutritionally independent.
Who is considered the father of modern zoology?
Konrad Gessner, 1516 to 1565, a Swiss naturalist, is often credited as the father of modern zoology. Based on his 3-volume Historia Animalium, which served as a standard reference work throughout Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries.
What were the first uses of the terms gene and genotype?
The terms gene, from the Greek term genos, meaning to give birth to, and genotype were first used in 1909 by a Danish botanist, Wilhelm Johansen, 1857 to 1927. Johansen is considered to be one of the architects of modern genetics.
Why do animals in a zoo pace?
Pacing is an indication of lack of stimulation. A recent doctoral study found that larger animals, which have a larger home range in the wild, are particularly prone to pacing in captivity, a behavior known as cage stereotyping. Most reputable zoos attempt to assuage pacing by providing what is known as animal enrichment. Enrichment may include constantly changing objects, odors, and sounds to mimic the types of stimulations that would be found in the animal's natural habitat. As an example, in order to keep life interesting for poison dart frogs from South America, keepers will hide their crickets inside a coconut with holes drilled in it. The frogs then have to seek out the food inside the chirping coconut.
How does an in vivo study differ from an in vitro study?
An in vivo study uses living biological organisms and specimens. In contrast, an in vitro biological study is carried out in isolation from a living organism, such as in a petri dish or test tube.
What elements are common to all types of microscopes?
Three elements are needed to form an image: a source of illumination, a specimen to be examined, and a system of lenses that focuses the illumination on the specimen and forms the image.
What is the function of the endomembrane system?
The endomembrane system allows macromolecules to diffuse or be transferred from one of the components of the system to another.
Who first developed the modern technique for the isolation of cell parts?
Robert R. Bensley, 1867–1956, and Normand Lewis Hoare, 1902–1958, disrupted the liver cells in a guinea pig and isolated mitochondria in 1934. Between 1938 and 1946, Albert Claude, 1899–1983, continued the work of Bensley and Hoare and isolated two fractions, a heavier fraction consisting of mitochondria and another fraction of lighter submicroscopic granules, which he called microsomes. Further developments led to the development of centrifugal techniques of cell fractionation commonly used now. The development of this procedure was one of the earliest examples of differential centrifugation. It initiated the era of modern experimental cell biology.
How can you avoid buying items made from endangered species?
The 1975 CITES, Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, Prohibits trade in endangered species. Traffic, the Wildlife Trade Monitoring Network, suggests that travelers buy wisely. Although it may be legal to buy products in certain popular tourist locations, it is often illegal or may require a permit to bring these objects home.
What is the most abundant group of organisms?
The eubacteria are the most abundant group of organisms on Earth. More living eubacteria inhabit the human mouth than the total number of mammals living on Earth.
How many flowers need to be tapped for bees to gather enough nectar to produce 1 pound of honey?
Bees must gather 4 pounds 18 kilograms of nectar, which requires the bees to tap about 2 million flowers. In order to produce 1 pound, 454 g, of honey. The honey is gathered by worker bees, whose lifespan is 3 to 6 weeks. Long enough to collect about a teaspoon of nectar.
What is the law of complementary base pairing?
The law of complementary base pairing refers to the pairing of nitrogenous bases in a specific manner. Purines pair with pyrimidines. More specifically, adenine must always pair with thymine, and guanine must always pair with cytosine. The basis of this law came from the data obtained by Edwin Chargaff. 1905 to 2002, and is known as Chargaff's law or rule. The DNA strands are called antiparallel.
At what speeds do fishes swim?
The maximum swimming speed of a fish is somewhat determined by the shape of its body and tail and by its internal temperature. The cosmopolitan sailfish, Istiophorus platypterus, is considered to be the fastest fish species. At least for short distances, swimming at greater than 60 miles per hour, 95 kilometers per hour. Some American fishermen, however, believe that the bluefin tuna, Thunnus thinus, is the fastest, but the fastest speed recorded for this species so far is 43.4 miles per hour, 69.8 kilometers per hour. Data is extremely difficult to secure because of the practical difficulties in measuring the speeds. The yellowfin tuna, Thunnus albicares, and the waoi, Acanthocybium solandri, are also fast. Timed at 46.35 miles per hour, 74.5 kilometers per hour, and 47.88 miles per hour, 77 kilometers per hour, respectively during 10 to 20 second sprints. Flying fish swim at 40 plus mph, 64 plus kilometers per hour, dolphins at 37 miles per hour. 60 kilometers per hour, trout at 15 miles per hour, 24 kilometers per hour, and Blenny at 5 miles per hour, 8 kilometers per hour. Humans can swim 5.19 miles per hour, 8.3 kilometers per hour.
What are archaebacteria?
Archaebacteria, domain archaea, are primitive bacteria that often live in extreme environments. This domain includes the following: 1. Thermophils, heat lovers, which live in very hot environments, including the hot sulfur springs of Yellowstone National Park, which reach temperatures ranging from 140 to 176 degrees Fahrenheit, 60 to 80 degrees Celsius. 2. Halophils, salt lovers, which live in locations with high concentrations of salinity, such as the Great Salt Lake in Utah, which has salinity levels that range from 15 to 20%. Seawater normally has a level of salinity of 3%. 3. Methanogens, which obtain their energy by using hydrogen gas, H2, to reduce carbon dioxide, CO2, to methane gas, CH4.
Which plants have been used to create dyes?
Natural materials, including many plants, were the source of all dyes until the late 19th century. Blue dye was historically rare and was obtained from the indigo plant, Indigofera tincturatoria. Another color difficult to obtain for dye was red. The madder plant, Rubia tinctorum, was an excellent source of red dye and was used for the famous red coats of the British Army.
Why was Wallace not as well known as Darwin?
While Darwin was well connected to the scientific establishment of the time, Wallace entered the scene somewhat later and so was less well known. Although Darwin would become far more famous than Wallace in subsequent decades, Wallace became quite well known during his own time as a naturalist, writer, and lecturer. He was also honored with numerous awards for his work.
What is the SI system of measurement?
French scientists as far back as the 17th and 18th centuries questioned the hodgepodge of the many illogical and imprecise standards used for measurement, and they began a crusade to make a comprehensive, logical, precise, and universal measurement system called Système International des Unités, or SI for short. It uses the metric system as its base. Since all the units are in multiples of 10, calculations are simplified. Today, all countries except the United States, Burma, and Liberia use the system. However, some elements within American society do use SI scientists. Exporting/importing industries, and federal agencies, as of November 30, 1992. The SI or metric system has 7 fundamental standards: the meter, for length, the kilogram, for mass, the second, for time, the ampere, for electric current, the Kelvin, for temperature, the candela, for luminous intensity, and the mole, for amount of substance. In addition, 2 supplementary units, the radian, plane angle, and steradian, solid angle, and a large number of derived units compose the current system, which is still evolving. Some derived units, which use special names, are the Hertz, Newton, Pascal, Joule, Watt, Coulomb, Volt, Farad, Ohm, Siemens, Weber, Tesla, Henry, Lumen, Lux, Becquerel, Gray, and Sievert. The C's unit of volume or capacity is the cubic decimeter, but many still use liter in its place. Very large or very small dimensions are expressed through a series of prefixes, which increase or decrease in multiples of 10. For example, a decimeter is 1/10 of a meter. A centimeter is 1/100 of a meter, and a millimeter is 1/1000 of a meter. A decameter is 10 meters, a hectometer is 100 meters, and a kilometer is 1000 meters. The use of these prefixes enables the system to express these units in an orderly way and avoid inventing new names and new relationships.